March 26, 2022. El Salvador records 87 murders in just 72 hours, the bloodiest weekend in the country's history. That night, President Nayib Bukele took to Twitter and declared war. He suspended the constitution and began a campaign of mass arrests unlike anything the region had seen. 3 years later, El Salvador's homicide rate dropped 98% from 106 to 1.3 per 100,000 people. That's lower than the US, France, and Canada. And while global leaders deal with terrible approval ratings, Nayib Bukele sits at over 90%, the highest in the democratic world. But there's a catch. Nearly 2 in every 100 people are in prison, by far the highest in the world, and the country is beginning to look more like a dictatorship than democracy. So this begs the question, do the ends justify the means? And is Bukele a sinner or a saint? Our story starts with the war and the death of this man, Archbishop Oscar Romero. El Salvador has a bloody and incredibly complex history. We don't have time to explain everything, but here are the spark notes. Starting in the late 1800s, the country was ruled by coffee and agricultural oligarchs, called the 14 families. Now, it wasn't exactly 14 families, more like a few dozen, but the name stuck. They controlled basically everything, but this led to a ton of pushback. To protect their control, they partnered with armed forces and crushed the opposition. This included business competition, the church, and indigenous communities. Over time, these armed forces grew increasingly powerful and turned El Salvador into a military dictatorship, becoming more formalized in 1931. In 1932, they slaughtered over 10,000 indigenous people and peasants to stop a communist uprising. They forbid peasants and working-class people from organizing. They blatantly stole elections and terrorized communities with their death squads for decades. But it all came to a head on October 15, 1979, when more moderate members of the military overthrew General Carlos Romero after they had had enough with the death and chaos in their country. This new junta promised to put an end to the death squads. They promised land reforms. They promised a path to prosperity, and the US, under Jimmy Carter, backed them. But the reformist officers couldn't keep control of the junta, and splinter factions formed, and death squads grew again. We cannot stress just how important this was. And remember Archbishop Romero? He was begging Jimmy Carter to stop backing the military juntas. He feared for his nation and his people. But on March 24, 1980, while performing mass, yes, a prayer, he was shot and killed in front of a crowd, and El Salvador was officially beyond saving. The communist factions combined under one banner, the FMLN, and the US, fearing for the spread of communism, doubled down in their support of the military. El Salvador was an open war zone, and 500,000 people fled to America and elsewhere. Many settled in LA and experienced violence from local Mexican and African American gangs. To protect themselves, teenage asylees formed MS-13 while others joined Barrio 18. A bitter rivalry formed, and LA experienced some of the most heinous and violent gang activity in the country. In 1992 alone, Los Angeles County recorded an all-time peak of 2,589 homicides. For context, the county's homicide total today fluctuates around 500 to 650 per year, with more people. Having had enough, Bill Clinton passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act in September 1996. The law was simple: lower the burden required to deport criminals. And the effect was major. Tens of thousands of El Salvadorian gang members shipped back to El Salvador. Now, it's important to understand that El Salvador just ended a brutal civil war. The country was in an incredibly fragile state, and they didn't have the resources or institutions to fight these coordinated gangs. MS-13 and Barrio 18 saw this and took advantage. They entrenched themselves in neighborhoods, leveraged gang recruitment techniques they learned in America, and dominated El Salvador's weak police force. They extorted small businesses, took over entire communities, forcibly recruited teenagers, and basically ruled like kings. To understand just how bad it got, we put some data together. Here are the murder rates per 100,000 for different countries. The US 6, Canada 2, Western Europe 1, and Mexico 17. The US and Mexico particularly stand out as having high murder rates, right? But when we add El Salvador to the mix, 103, it makes everything else look like nothing. And moreover, if you just look at men aged 15 to 29, that number jumps to nearly 400. And by 2016, gangs controlled territory in 247 of the country's 262 municipalities, with gang membership representing 1% of the population. Think about that. Imagine if gangs controlled 94% of the United States. The saddest part is that the government tried various tactics to stamp out this problem. In the early 2000s, they performed mass arrests, but they segregated gangs into different prisons. This turned these prisons into command centers and increased their sophistication. Then in 2012, the government decided to broker a truce directly with MS-13 and Barrio 18. But this was also a terrible strategy. The gangs leveraged their reduction in police pressure as an opportunity to deepen their extortion networks, solidify political leverage, and arm up. And when the secret truce leaked to the press, the citizens' outrage led to the truce falling apart, and open war was waged against the police and military. As you can see from this chart, the homicide rate would ebb and flow, but nothing solved it permanently. Any solution was temporary. It's no surprise that the people of El Salvador had just had enough. 54% said they limited their recreational activity out of fear. 78% of citizens said that traditional parties didn't represent them. And 77% believe the government was corrupt. It was on this fertile ground that a recently dejected Nayib Bukele would rise. Nayib Bukele was born into an affluent family, a very affluent family. We are talking Sephra life levels of wealth. His father was of Palestinian descent and had built a sprawling business empire spanning advertising, textiles, and more. Bukele's foray into politics began when he worked for and led his father's PR firm, Obermet. One of Obermet's biggest clients was the FMLN. Yes, the left-wing political party formed by communist guerrillas in the lead-up to the Civil War. Advising FMLN gave him a better taste for politics, and at the age of 29, Bukele decided to run for mayor of a small town under the FMLN banner. And he won. He later parlayed this into becoming the mayor of the nation's capital, San Salvador. But everything wasn't so picture perfect. You see, tensions were brewing inside the FMLN as party insiders viewed him as arrogant, privileged, and uncontrollable. And in 2017, they expelled him from the party, claiming he had thrown an apple at a female party member and called her a witch. You literally can't make this stuff up. Untethered from the FMLN, Bukele formed his own political movement, Nuevas Ideas, New Ideas, pretty simple. He positioned himself as a post-ideological populist, neither right nor left, just a young outsider ready to clean up the corruption of the elites. When electoral authorities blocked Nuevas Ideas from registering in time for the 2019 presidential election, Bukele pragmatically formed an alliance with GANA, or Ghana, a right-wing party. Running entirely on an anti-corruption and anti-establishment platform heavily propelled by Twitter and Facebook, he won a landslide victory in the first round with 53% of the vote. And at 37, he broke the 30-year grip of the two traditional parties, ARENA and FMLN, becoming the president of El Salvador. Now, Bukele didn't pounce against gang violence immediately after getting elected. No. In fact, he criticized previous governments for their iron-fisted approaches, arguing it only fueled more violence. But in March 2022, after negotiations between the government and gang leaders reportedly broke down, gangs killed 87 random civilians in a single weekend. Bukele immediately changed his tune and took an even harder stance than those he had previously criticized. He went to the legislature and declared a state of exception, suspending constitutional rights, wiretap protections, and the right to due process. Armed with the power to do whatever he wanted, Bukele acted swiftly. First, the military and police launched synchronized operations to seal off whole neighborhoods identified as gang strongholds, or red zones. After a perimeter was established, they went door by door searching for gang members and set up checkpoints around that perimeter to prevent anyone from escaping. Soldiers and police profiled based on tattoos or specific clothing. They took in anonymous tips from neighbors. They even acted on behavior they thought was odd. Once rounded up, these suspected gang members were bused to temporary holding facilities, where each of them had their heads shaved and clothes replaced with white shorts. Next, detainees were moved to maximum security prisons, including the Center for Confinement of Terrorism, which houses 40,000 inmates. These prisons allowed no visitation, no enrichment programs, no in-person court visits, and only 30 minutes of time outside their cells each day. And the last phase, mass trials. Detainees are tried in massive groups, sometimes hundreds at a time, by faceless or anonymous judges whose identities are protected. Human rights organizations around the world, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have denounced the approach. Critics point to the erosion of freedoms, collective trials, profiling, and more. But here's the thing, 90% of citizens are in favor. Think about that, 90%. What other policies exist where nearly every single citizen is in agreement? And before you say these numbers are made up, think twice. Third-party surveyors have verified this. They all agree that Bukele's policies are incredibly popular, and they could point to one stat that says why. Homicides are down 98%. To locals who have suffered at the hands of gangs for decades, the means justify the ends. But now that crime is down and the country is safer, you'd expect that the state of exception would be lifted, right? Real quick, if you're enjoying the video up to this point, please consider leaving a subscribe. It really helps the channel. And now back to the video. To this day, the state of exception remains. Moreover, Bukele has made other reforms to consolidate power and squash dissent. He replaced judges on the Supreme Court's constitutional chamber and leveraged the newly appointed judges to allow him to run for office again. His party holds a supermajority, functioning as a rubber stamp for executive decrees. And under the guise of security, prominent human rights attorneys, constitutional lawyers, and journalists have been targeted, arrested, or forced into exile. Bukele has transformed El Salvador from a failed state ruled by gang violence into a police state ruled by executive absolutism. One of the more appalling examples of censorship occurred in May 2025. The news outlet El Faro launched a video interview series featuring gang leaders who detailed their long alleged negotiations with the Bukele government. Yep, Bukele tried making peace with the gangs. Unsurprisingly, Bukele was not happy with this being out in the public. In direct retaliation, the Attorney General's office targeted 7 El Faro journalists with criminal warrants, charging them with advocacy of crime and unlawful association. Facing immediate imprisonment under a legal system with zero due process, the journalists were forced to flee. By 2026, the entire core staff of El Faro and human rights group Cristosal were operating entirely from exile. More broadly, the government has enacted laws that make it illegal to report on gang activity, handing down up to 15-year prison sentences for failing to comply. Then there's the use of Pegasus software to spy on journalists, especially those investigating state corruption. You get the idea. El Salvador has a no-nonsense policy on any dissent, but advocates for this would argue it is necessary. And this is where we get to the interesting question of practicality versus principle. El Salvador was a country with democratic institutions, a strong constitution, and on the surface, a rule of law. But even with this, the country was basically run by gangs. To citizens, the choice was simple: violence or peace. And other leaders in the region are taking no, leading to a new term being coined: Bukelismo. In Colombia, Abelardo de la Espriella was elected with very similar ideas as Bukele: mega prisons, mass incarcerations, rejection of soft peace, and more. Not only that, but Espriella also has a similar curated aesthetic as Bukele and used social media to bypass traditional media, which generally opposed his candidacy. In Ecuador, Daniel Noboa declared an internal armed conflict and state of emergency after seeing an explosion of drug trafficking violence. He also approved the construction of his own maximum security prison. Even Honduras, which was run by a left-wing party, announced plans for a 2,000-person island penal colony. Really ask yourself this. Who are we as foreigners to judge what the people on the ground democratically voted for? There is one nation that Bukele looks up to more than any other: Singapore. Under founder Lee Kuan Yew's leadership, Singapore transformed from a crime-infested, dirt-poor colony into a safe, clean, and global powerhouse. But like Bukele, the means were not always pretty. Lee Kuan Yew used the Internal Security Act to allow the government to detain individuals indefinitely without trial. He introduced capital punishment and zero-tolerance policies towards gang activity and drugs. He shifted the burden of proof from the state to the accused, leading to incredibly high conviction rates. And he weaponized defamation lawsuits and used them to financially ruin critics. But Lee Kuan Yew is remembered like a saint, the savior of Singapore. I, for one, admire him. For Lee Kuan Yew, what mattered was not the means, but the outcome. For Lee Kuan Yew, what mattered was society, not the individual. These are concepts foreign to the West, but battle-tested in the East, in Singapore, Korea, and China. And now Bukele steps on the podium to try his hand. But only time will tell whether he will be remembered as a sinner or a saint. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to 2 and 20 for more on economics, politics, and make sure you check out our free Discord in the description. We actually hang out in there and have debates. See ya.